Our next project is going to be based around another style of underpainting. And this painting is really the only painting that I am giving you your source material for. And it's because you're going to learn a very specific kind of painting. Um, I know I did this painting when I was in my very first Painting 1 class, and it's a project that helped me understand better how to manipulate the paint and really exploit the paint and all the possibilities that it has through layering. So this project is based around a couple traditions. Some of you may have seen this work before. It's called Impression Sunrise by Monet. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Impressionists. This was the piece that the Impressionists were given their name from. When Monet showed this work, it was sort of scandalous because people saw this as an underpainting. Oftentimes, landscape painters would go out and they would take a quick impression of the color and light of an event, um, and that would be used for part of their underpainting. So it's kind of the beginning step in a painting. And he presented this as his finished work. This was in 1872. So just to give you an idea of what most paintings look like then, this is another work from 1872. This is the Great Canyon of the Sierra in Yosemite. Um, you can see it's a big step going from this to this, right? You got a big giant leap. So the process that we're going to learn today is actually starting from that very loose gestural underpainting to a more finite finished piece. We're going very general to specific. So this is a very different kind of underpainting. The other thing that this project deals with is learning how to use your different painting mediums. We started a little bit with this in the first project, but the second project, we're really going to get into how to use them and at what step you start adding them to your paint. Now, a medium, we can just kind of go over what the meaning of it is. Paint consists of two parts. One part is pigment, that's the little particles of color. The other part is the medium. That's the thing that the pigment is floating in. Oftentimes it's a clear oil or a polymer medium, even mediums like watercolor or gouache. They all have different mediums that the pigment is suspended in. So now the different parts of the class are working within different mediums already, right? We have those who are working with oil paint. We have those that are working with acrylic paint. But there's also other mediums and things you can add to those paints where we can change the way the paint dries. It can change the consistency. It can aid mixing. Um, we can help speed up the paint drying time, or we can help slow it down. We can also add luminosity. And if you go into a store, there's even all kinds of mediums that you can use even outside what we'll get to in this class. But we're going to go over sort of the two classic painting mediums for oil and acrylic today. And the way that we're going to use these mediums, as we talked about before, is based in the idea of fat over lean. So when we talk about fat over lean, it's the idea that you're adding a higher level of oil to the paint with each subsequent layer. And it's based on the idea that you want your paint to be archival. And if you were to take and put a less oily layer of paint over a more oily layer of paint, that top layer will actually dry faster because oil paint oxidizes, right? It'll actually cause some instability in the paint and you will get something like this where you get cracking. We're following this process in acrylic too because even with the acrylic mediums, if you put a real kind of washy, thin, watery layer over top of uh, a more solid acrylic layer. They tend not to bond as easily, even though they're, because you're breaking apart those plastic resins. So the idea is we're trying to build a painting that's going to be archival or withstanding the effects of time. So that's our goal. So for this next painting, we're going to be building it in layers. Actually, there's 4 layers. You'll see 4 different parts to this specific painting. But we're going to be using different mediums as we go along. Now, this first layer that you're starting today is still going to be Gamsol only. So when we water down our oil paint, you're going to be using the Gamsol, your clean Gamsol. The second layers, you're going to be creating what's called a classic oil painting medium. It's 1 part oil, 1 part Gamsol, 1 part Damar varnish. Those should all be in your kit if you bought it. If you don't have the Damar, there are some substitutes of varnish or other different things you could add to it, so feel free to email me if you have questions about that part. The Damar itself tends to be, it's got a stronger smell to it. Damar varnish is comes from a tree resin, and it has a stronger turpentine that it's been dissolved in, so it's kind of got almost like a tree-ish smell. You smell it like a really strong Christmas tree smell. Um, so if you're working in not a well ventilated place in your house, you might want to sub something out for that anyways. We're not going to get to that till next week, so feel free to email me about that this week if you have questions about the Damar varnish. And for acrylic, we're going to be using our matte medium and the retarder. We use the matte medium before. It's the polymer that is found in acrylic paint. The retarder is actually something that helps to slow down the dry time of the paint. So it's going to give you a little bit more time for blending and modeling the paint itself. We're not going to use that till the second layer. So if you haven't gotten the retarder yet, that gives you some time to get it together. Depending on the paint, you may have to mix them together. So both the oil paint and the acrylic paint in your kit, you're meant to have a squeeze bottle of some kind. If you bought the kit from the bookstore, it has the squeeze bottle in there. If you didn't buy the kit, you should get, you've got a week to kind of get this together. You should get a shampoo bottle or like a little disposable travel size bottle together that you can mix your medium in. So you'll need that whether you're in oil or acrylic, because a lot of the retarders, it actually has a recipe that you have to mix it with a certain amount of um, the matte medium if you're using it for translucent glazing. So we'll go over that next week, but just make sure you have your matte medium, your retarder, and the squeeze bottle ready. Other oil painting mediums, if it in your kit, if you bought it from the bookstore, you should have Galclid. That's actually a resin type of painting medium. It's kind of made out of petroleum that will increase the fluidity, so it makes it easier to brush on, easier to kind of lose those brush strokes. And it also speeds up the drying time. So, typically with Gamsol, your painting will dry in 24 hours. Some of you probably already noticed that oil paint has a very long dry time. Sometimes it can take a few days to dry, sometimes a week if it's really humid. If you paint really thickly in oil paint, it could take a few weeks to totally dry. So the Galclid helps to speed that along. Liquin is another type. It's not in the kit. Liquin, to me, has a little bit stronger of a vapors to it than the Galclid. That's why I put the Galclid in the kit. Liquid is also another type of quick drying oil medium that helps dry within 24 hours. The difference between liquid and galclid has a shinier finish to it, sort of glossy looking. Liquid is a little bit matter look to it, sort of has sort of a softer finish. So sometimes people have preferences to the two for that, but it does matter how much you add to your paint, how much it's going to change the actual sheen of it. Okay, so this is the image that you're going to use for the first layer. I'm only showing you each layer at a time. Your goal is going to be to try to replicate this very blurry image. And don't worry, there's an image of it in the Canvas post. You're going to try to replicate this in your oil or acrylic paint. So sped up version of me demoing the first layer. I'm using acrylic this time for the demos, just so you can sort of see the difference. I used oil in the last series of demos. So as you're going, loose brush strokes, don't worry about them looking nice and neat. Just as you're working with acrylic, just remember it's nice to have a nice dry flat brush that can help you blend, just to have it next to you as you go. If you want to blur your edges, it's going to help to have a second brush to help kind of blend out those edges. Because those of you in acrylic, sometimes getting kind of the blurry effect is you have to work a little bit harder at it just because it wants to dry quicker. But if you're using a second blending brush as you go, it'll help you kind of blend and smudge those edges together. Also, don't worry if you get like drips or weird kind of separating. That's something we're going to talk about in the second layer. Sometimes those little weird effects that happen with the paint you can use to your advantage, especially in landscape painting. They'll actually kind of add some areas of interest. If you guys notice, I didn't do a drawing first. For this first layer, you're not going to create an underdrawing. You're going to start with the paint itself. Does this mean that your painting won't be 100% accurate? Absolutely. It doesn't have to look exactly like the photograph. The photograph is just a reference that we're using. There's some flexibility in the subject matter, so it doesn't matter if you have things exactly the right size or not. That's actually part of this process of learning. This is sort of a looser start. Move quickly as you're painting with loose edges, washy brush strokes. Don't worry about leaving some visible brush strokes. Those can actually be interesting, or drips or areas where the paint separates. That's all going to be a part of that first layer. Look for a variety of color. Notice I didn't just paint one big area, just one green that looked green. You're looking for a variety of greens or variety of blues. You really want to look for the color differences that are within there this early on. So you're trying to really think about looking at what you see, even though it might at first look like a big old brown patch, there's actually different colors of brown and gray within there. So that's kind of what you're going to try to hone your eye into picking out. Make sure that you cover all the white of the gesso paper. Remember, you should be working on that sheet of paper. You put 3 layers of gesso on. Even if an area looks white, try to coat it with a color. Maybe it's a really light blue or light yellow. You can always pull some white back over top if you feel necessary, but every part of that white paper should be covered with color. If you're in oil paint, you're adding Gamsol only to your paint until it becomes very washy. You want loose, washy, thin layer. Acrylic paint, you should be adding water to your paint until nice and loose and washy. All right, have fun.